The art of not giving a damn. Introduction. You are exhausted from caring too much about everything that doesn't deserve you. It is 3 in the morning and you are not asleep. You are lying in the dark replaying a conversation from Tuesday. Something you said, something they said, the way it landed wrong, the way you could have said it better, the way you've been turning it over in your mind like a stone with a sharp edge you keep finding new ways to cut yourself on. You are rehearsing arguments that will never happen with people who have probably already forgotten the whole thing. You are catastrophizing outcomes that exist nowhere on earth except inside the electric hum of your own skull. You are carrying at 3 in the morning in the dark the full crushing weight of 100 imaginary futures, and none of them are real, and you cannot stop. This is not a clinical disorder. This is not weakness. This is what happens to a human being who has been living wrong. Not morally wrong, not stupidly wrong, but mechanically wrong, the way an engine runs wrong when it's burning the wrong fuel. You've been spending your energy on things that were never yours to carry. You've been trying to control what cannot be controlled, predict what cannot be predicted, and please people who were never going to be pleased no matter what you did. You've been so busy managing the imaginary jury of everyone's opinion that you forgot to live a life they were supposedly judging. And you are tired. God. You are tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, because the exhaustion isn't in your body. It's in a part of you that's been working without a break for years, scanning for danger, bracing for criticism, rehearsing disasters that never arrive, and apologizing for ones that were never your fault. What this book is about to offer you is not a self-help program. It is not a system of positive affirmations or a 10-step plan for managing your anxiety. It is something older and stranger and more honest than any of that. The art of not giving a damn. And yes, it is an art, a practice, a discipline. Something that must be learned and practiced and returned again and again, is the highest form of psychological freedom available to a human being. It is not laziness. It is not nihilism. It is not indifference or selfishness or the studied coolness of someone performing not caring for an audience. It is something far more radical and far more difficult than any of those things. It is the ability to choose, with precision and without apology, what genuinely deserves your energy, and to release everything else without guilt, without drama, and without looking back. The Stoics knew this. So did the Buddhist teachers sitting in silence 2.5 millennia ago. So does every psychologist who has spent decades watching human beings suffer and noticing, with quiet consistency, that the ones who suffer least are not the ones who care about nothing. They are the ones who have mastered the art of caring only about what is theirs to care about, and letting the rest go the way you let smoke go. You see it, you acknowledge it was real, and then it's gone. By the time you finish this book, you will know the difference. You will know what is worth your energy and what has been stealing it. You will have the tools to put down what you've been carrying, and you will be lighter than you have felt in years. Not because your problems disappeared, but because you finally stopped carrying the ones that were never yours. Chapter 1. The Worry Machine. Why your brain was designed to torture you, and how to turn it off. There is a man, call him David, because that is close enough to his real name, who spent the better part of 40 years worrying. He worried about his heart, convinced from his early 30s that every flutter and skip was the opening act of cardiac event. He worried about money with the specific, grinding intensity of someone who had grown up without enough of it, even during the decades when he had more than enough. He worried about what his co-workers thought of him, what his neighbors made of him, whether his children would turn out okay, whether his marriage was as solid as it felt, whether the solid feeling itself was a sign that he wasn't paying close enough attention. He worried, in other words, the way most people worry, comprehensively, persistently, and with the full creative force of mind that was very good at generating scenarios and very bad at letting them go. Then one afternoon in his late 50s, sitting across from a therapist who had the particular gift of asking questions that felt like small earthquakes, David was given an assignment. He was asked to go home and write down every significant thing he had ever worried about. Every health scare, every financial dread, every professional fear, every relational catastrophe he had braced himself against, and then beside each one, to write down what had actually happened. He came back the following week with 4 pages of cramped handwriting and an expression on his face that the therapist would later describe as a man who had just discovered he'd been paying rent on a house that was never on fire. Less than 8% of what David had spent 4 decades dreading had ever materialized, and of the things that had, the real losses, the genuine hardships, the moments where life had actually knocked him flat, he had handled every single one, not gracefully, not without pain, but he had handled them. The worry had not prepared him. It had not protected him. It had not, in any measurable way, made the hard things easier. It had simply taken 40 years. The reason David's story is not unusual is because of something that happened roughly 200,000 years ago on an African savanna that has absolutely nothing to do with your current life, and yet governs almost every moment of it. Your brain, the same brain reading these words right now, was built for a world where the primary threat to your survival was physical and immediate. A predator in the grass, a rival at the waterhole, a winter with not enough food. The nervous system that kept your ancestors alive was a system of extraordinary sensitivity, a hair-trigger threat detector that could not afford false negatives. Missing a real threat got you killed. Being wrong about an imaginary one cost you nothing but a few seconds of adrenaline. So evolution built a machine that is spectacularly, almost comically biased towards seeing danger. A machine that would rather sound the alarm 100 times unnecessarily than miss the one time it mattered. That machine is still running. Right now, inside you, that same ancient software is scanning your environment for threats with the same urgent intensity it would have devoted to a lion, and it is finding them everywhere. In your inbox, in a text message left unread, in the tone of your manager's voice on a Tuesday afternoon, in the news cycle, in the way someone looked at you at a party 2 weeks ago. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a predator and a performance review. It responds to social rejection with the same alarm signals it was designed to send when your physical survival was at stake. Because for most of human history, social rejection was a survival threat. Being cast out of the group meant death. The brain that kept you liked and accepted and useful to the tribe kept you alive. And so it treats the possibility of someone thinking badly of you with the same desperate seriousness it would once have reserved for a charging animal in the dark. This is not a character flaw. This is not anxiety as personal failure. This is hardware running outdated software in a world it was never designed for. And the first thing you need to understand, really understand, in your body, not just in the abstract, is that your worrying mind is not telling you the truth about reality. It is telling you the truth about threat assessment in an environment that no longer exists. The worry machine is not a reliable narrator. It is a smoke detector that goes off when you make toast. Here is what the worried mind does that makes it so seductive and so destructive at the same time. It mistakes thinking about a problem for solving it. There is a feeling, you know this feeling, of productive urgency that comes with worrying, a sense that by turning the problem over and over in your mind, you are doing something about it, preparing for it, staying ahead of it. You are not. Rumination is not preparation. Running the disaster scenario for the 47th time does not make you 47 times more ready for it. It makes you exhausted. It floods your system with stress hormones. It narrows your thinking, and it keeps you so focused on the imaginary future catastrophe that you become functionally useless in the actual present moment where the only real action was ever available to you anyway. Worry confuses motion with progress. It is the mental equivalent of running on a treadmill and calling a road trip. What changes everything? And this is the first foundational shift this book is going to ask of you, is learning to observe the worry machine without being operated by it, not to silence it, not to fight it, not to white-knuckle your way through meditation while the anxious thoughts hammer at the door, just to see it, to develop the capacity to notice the thought arriving, the catastrophic health scenario, the social humiliation replay, the financial apocalypse narrative, and to recognize it for what it is, which is weather. It is not you. It is not reality. It is your mind doing what minds do when left unsupervised in a world full of uncertainty, which is generate threats, because that is a job it was built to do and no one ever told it the world had changed. There is a woman named Elena who had her first panic attack at 23 in a grocery store and spent the next 6 years arranging her entire life around avoiding the possibility of another one. She stopped going to crowded places. She stopped taking jobs that required travel. She turned down relationships because she was afraid of what would happen to her if they ended. She was not, by any external measure, living. She was managing. Then she found a therapist who said something that cracked her open. The panic attack was not the problem. The problem was everything she had built around the panic attack to keep it from happening again. The fortress she had constructed to stay safe was the cage. The anxiety she was running from had been quietly running her entire life by making her afraid not just of panic, but of everything that might, in some chain of unlikely events, lead to panic. When Elena finally learned, slowly and perfectly, through real work and real discomfort, to watch the anxiety rise without immediately obeying it, something happened that she had not expected. It began to lose its authority, not its presence. It was still there, but it was weather, and she was learning for the first time that she was the sky. You are the sky. This is not a metaphor designed to make you feel better. It is a functional description of what you actually are in relation to your thoughts, the awareness in which they arise, move through, and dissolve, not the thoughts themselves. The worry is not you. The catastrophizing is not you. The relentless threat scanning is not you. It is what your mind does, and your mind is something you have, not something you are. The moment you can feel the difference between those two things, even briefly, even imperfectly, the machine loses its grip, not permanently, not completely, not all at once, but enough to take a breath, enough to ask, with genuine curiosity rather than panic, is this thought true, or is this just the alarm going off in an empty room again? David, the man with 4 pages of imagined disasters, keeps that list now, not as a reminder of how much time he wasted. He is done with that particular guilt, but as evidence that his mind, left to its own devices, was a magnificent and well-intentioned liar. Evidence that almost none of what he feared ever came, and that the things that did come he survived. Evidence that the life he was so busy protecting himself from losing was, for most of those 40 years, the life he was too worried to actually live. You're not David, but you know the feeling, and now you know what it is. It is a machine, and you are the one who gets to decide, from here on, how much of your life you hand over to it. Chapter 2, The Opinion Trap, How to Stop Living Inside Other People's Heads and Come Home to Your Own. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has no name in most languages, but that almost every person reading this has felt. The exhaustion of performing. Not performing on a stage, not performing in theatrical sense, but performing in the quiet, constant, invisible way that begins the moment you wake up and check your phone, and doesn't end until you fall asleep, and sometimes not even then. It is the exhaustion of the person who edits their text messages 3 times before sending them to make sure they land correctly. The person who replays every conversation afterward like a director watching footage, looking for the moments that might have made them look stupid or needy or too much or not enough. The person who becomes so fluent in the imagined inner lives of other people that they have almost entirely lost access to their own. Here is the thing about that exhaustion that nobody says plainly enough. You are spending the majority of your mental and emotional energy managing the imagined perceptions of people who are themselves spending the majority of their mental and emotional energy managing yours. You are locked inside a performance for an audience that is locked inside their own performance. For an audience that includes you, everyone is watching. No one is watching. The whole architecture of social anxiety is, when you pull back far enough to see it clearly, almost absurd. A city of 8 billion people, each convinced they are standing under a spotlight, each burning their life trying to control the light. Me, a woman named Grace. Grace spent 3 years, 3 full years of her one life, turning down a promotion at work because she was afraid of what her colleagues would think, afraid they would see her as arrogant for wanting more, afraid they would resent her success and punish her with social coldness, afraid of becoming the kind of person that other people talk about when they think she can't hear. So she stayed where she was, performing contentment she didn't feel, telling herself she wasn't ready, telling herself the timing was wrong, telling herself 100 different stories that all had the same hidden sentence underneath them. I cannot bear the thought of people thinking badly of me. Then the promotion was offered a 4th time by a manager who was frankly bewildered by her continued reluctance, and Grace finally said yes. Not because her fear had disappeared, but because she had become more exhausted by the avoidance than she was afraid of the exposure. She took the role, and then she did something that should have felt anticlimactic, but instead felt like discovering that the monster under the bed was a pair of old shoes. She talked to her colleagues. She asked, carefully and directly, how they felt about the change. And what she found was that the 3 people she had been most afraid of had spent those 3 years barely thinking about her at all. Each of them locked so completely inside their own private theater of self-consciousness that her career trajectory had registered as, at most, a passing thought between their own more pressing internal dramas. 3 years. For an audience that wasn't there. The reason this happens, the reason intelligent, capable, self-aware people like Grace surrender years of their lives to the management of other people's imaginary opinions, is not stupidity and it is not weakness. It is wiring, deep, old, extraordinarily well-reinforced wiring that was laid down in you before you had the language to question it. Human beings are social creatures in a way that goes far beyond preference. Our brains are literally built for belonging, and for most of human history, belonging was not a comfort but a survival requirement. The group kept you alive. Rejection from the group could kill you. And so the brain evolved a system of near-constant social monitoring, an internal radar always scanning for signs of disapproval, always calculating how current behavior might affect social standing, always adjusting, always performing, always trying to make the numbers work. Then childhood arrived and reinforced every bit of it. Most people grew up in environments where love, even good, well-intentioned love, came with conditions attached that were never quite spoken aloud, but were felt with absolute clarity. Be good. Be easy. Don't make waves. Don't embarrass us. Don't want too much or too loudly. The child who learns that love is something they must earn and maintain through correct behavior grows into an adult who is pathologically attuned to other people's emotional states, who reads a room with the sensitivity of a seismograph, who makes themselves useful and palatable and small, because somewhere very deep and very early, they learned that taking up too much space was dangerous. They carry that lesson into every room they ever enter for the rest of their life, usually without knowing they're carrying it, adjusting their posture and their volume and their desires and their boundaries around the invisible comfort requirements of whoever happens to be standing nearby. And here is what this costs. Not in some abstract psychological sense, but in the concrete daily currency of a life actually being lived. Every decision made based on how it will be perceived rather than how it feels true is a decision made from someone else's center of gravity. Every sentence edited for palatability rather than honesty is a small abandonment of self. Every opportunity declined out of fear of judgment is a piece of the life you were supposed to be living handed over to people who will never even know you gave it to them. The opinion trap does not ask for your happiness outright. It takes it incrementally, choice by choice, in pieces so small you barely notice each one going. Until one day you look up and realize you have built an entire life around managing other people's comfort, and you cannot find yourself anywhere in it. The liberation that is available here is real, but it requires first accepting something that the ego finds genuinely threatening. You cannot control what people think of you. Not now, not ever, not even slightly. You can influence it around the edges in limited ways for limited periods. But the thought that forms in another person's mind about who you are is formed by their entire history, their wounds, their projections, their own fears, their mood on that particular Tuesday, what they had for breakfast, who hurt them 20 years ago, and how you accidentally remind them of it. You are not the author of that thought. You never were. Every hour you have spent trying to write it for them has been an hour spent working on a manuscript you were never given the keys to and will never, ever be allowed to finish. What becomes possible when this lands, really lands, not as an idea but as a felt truth in the body, is extraordinary. The energy that was trapped in the management of perception is suddenly, startlingly available for something else. It is available for actual decision-making, the kind rooted in what you genuinely value, rather than what will be most easily defended to an imaginary jury. It is available for actual relationships, the ones where you are present and real rather than performing a carefully calibrated version of yourself, and wondering why you feel lonely even when surrounded by people who like you. It is available for the work you actually want to do, the risks you actually want to take, the life you've been putting off until you figure out how to live it in a way that no one will object to, which is to say, indefinitely. The return to yourself that this chapter is pointing toward is not arrogance. It is not the performance of not caring, which is its own kind of imprisonment, its own way of letting other people's opinions set the terms by simply inverting them. It is quieter and more genuine than that. It is a slow, sometimes uncomfortable, always worthwhile practice of relocating your center of gravity from the outside to the inside, from what they think to what you know, from their approval to your own, from the exhausting noise of 100 imagined audiences to clear, still signal of your own actual experience of your own actual life. Grace got the promotion. She is good at the job, which surprised no one who actually knew her. Her colleagues threw her a small celebration on her first day in the new role. One of the 3 people she had feared most brought a cake. Grace stood there eating it and thought about 3 years of avoidance and felt something that was not quite regret and not quite relief, but somewhere between the two. The particular feeling of understanding clearly and too late how much time you spend being afraid of rooms you are always going to walk through eventually anyway. You're going to walk through them. The only real question is how much of your life you spend standing outside first. Chapter 3. Let it burn. The radical practice of releasing what you cannot control. Picture a person holding a burning coal. Not metaphorically. Really see it. The coal is sitting in the palm of their hand, glowing orange at its edges, and it is causing genuine pain, the kind that makes the eyes water and the jaw clench and the whole body want to recoil. And the person is not dropping it. They are not dropping it because they are still in the middle of deciding whether it deserves to be dropped. They are examining it. They are turning it over in their mind, cataloging every injustice that led to them holding it, rehearsing the conversation they will have with the person who put in their hand, planning what they will say and how they will say it, and imagining precise expression of regret on that person's face when they finally understand what they have done. The coal is burning through the bone now. They are still deciding. This is not a story about someone else. This is a story of every human being who has ever refused to release something that was destroying them, because releasing it felt in some confused and desperate way, like losing, like letting the other person win, like agreeing that what happened was okay, or that it didn't matter, or that the pain it caused wasn't real. Holding on feels like the only remaining form of control available when everything else has already slipped through your fingers. And so people hold. They hold grudges that have been burning in their palms for decades. They hold grief that is calcified into bitterness, because releasing it would mean truly accepting that the loss was real. They hold on to failed relationships like wreckage in open water, clinging to the debris of something that already sank, because letting go means acknowledging there is nothing left to save. They argue with reality itself, with what happened, with what was said, with how things turned out, as if the argument, pursued with enough intensity for enough years, might eventually change the outcome. It will not. It never has. And this is the thing that philosophy and neuroscience and raw human experience all arrive at from completely different directions and find waiting for them like an old truth that has been sitting in the same chair for centuries. The majority of human suffering is not caused by what happens to people. It is caused by their relationship to what happens, their refusal to release what has already occurred, their insistence on wrestling with a reality that has already been decided while alive. They could be living moves past them like a river they are too busy fighting to enter. Epictetus understood this. He was a slave, not metaphorically, not in the modern loosely applied sense of the word, but literally enslaved, his physical freedom owned by another human being for the first part of his life. And he became one of the freest people in recorded history. His entire philosophy rests on a single distinction that is devastatingly simple and almost impossibly difficult to actually apply. Some things are in our power, and some things are not. What is in our power is what we think, what we choose, how we respond, what we give our attention, and our energy and our inner life to. What is not in our power is everything else. Other people's behavior, other people's opinions, the weather, the economy, the past, the future, the way things turned out, the way things might turn out. Every outcome in every situation that extends beyond the boundaries of our own choices. The Stoics called this a dichotomy of control, but that name makes it sound like a philosophical taxonomy, when really it is more like a surgery, a clean, precise, sometimes painful removal of everything you've been treating as yours that was never yours to begin with. The reason this 2,000-year-old idea still lands with the force of something brand new is because nothing about the human nervous system has made it easier to practice in the intervening centuries. We are still wired to feel that if we care enough, if we think about it hard enough, if we just find the right angle and push at the right moment, we can move what cannot be moved. We are still running the control software on situations that were never in the program. And the result is always the same. Not movement, but exhaustion. Not influence, but depletion. The energy poured into trying to control the uncontrollable doesn't come from nowhere. It comes directly from a life you were supposed to be living, siphoned off hour by hour into the drain of a struggle you were never going to win. There's a man named Thomas who spent 11 years angry at his father. The anger was not baseless. His father had been cold in a way that left marks, absent in a way that shaped Thomas's entire relationship to himself. And when Thomas finally tried to address it in his late 30s, his father deflected and minimized and turned the conversation back around in a way that people do when accountability feels more dangerous than the alternative. Thomas left that conversation more furious than he arrived. And then he did what people do with unresolvable anger at the people who formed them. He carried it. He carried it into his marriage, where it expressed itself as a brittleness around anything that felt like rejection. He carried it into his parenting, where it made him overcompensate in ways that exhausted him. He carried it into his work, where it drove him to prove things to an audience of one who wasn't watching. He carried it for 11 years, and for 11 years he called it justified, because it was, and he called it necessary, because it felt like the only honest response to what had happened. And those things were true, and also the coal was burning through the bone, and he was still deciding whether it deserved to be dropped. What finally shifted for Thomas was not forgiveness in the greeting card sense of the word, not a warm reconciliation, not the resolution he had wanted and would never receive. What shifted was a single clarifying question that a friend asked him one evening with the blunt simplicity of someone who loved him enough to say the uncomfortable thing. Who is the anger hurting? Not as an accusation, as a genuine inquiry. Thomas sat with it and found, when he answered honestly, that his father experienced the anger almost not at all. His father's life had continued with its characteristic indifference, while Thomas had been living inside it every single day, paying the daily rent on a building his father didn't even know existed. The anger was not protecting him. It was not holding his father accountable. It was not keeping the past from being erased. It was simply consuming him, and he was the only one being consumed. Releasing it was not a single moment. This is a part that the self-help version of the story always gets wrong. The part that makes real people feel like they are failing at healing, because it didn't happen clean and cinematic and complete. Releasing it was a practice, a choice made again and again in the moments when the old anger rose up and demanded to be fed. It was a decision, repeated and imperfect, to stop giving his life force to something he could not change, to turn that energy, all of it, the whole fierce quantity of it, toward the life that was actually available to him, the marriage that was real, the children who were present, the work that was his. It was not peace as the absence of pain. It was peace as a commitment to stop creating additional pain of refusing what already was. This is what release actually looks like when it is real. It does not look like pretending something didn't hurt. It does not look like performing detachment or manufacturing indifference, or telling yourself a story about how nothing matters until you're numb enough to believe it. Real release begins with full acknowledgement. Yes, this happened. Yes, it was real. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it was wrong. Yes, I wanted to go differently. Yes, I grieve the version of this that didn't come. You let it be completely what it was, without minimizing it, without rushing past the feeling to get to the resolution. And then, and only then, you make the conscious choice to stop feeding it your future. Not because it didn't deserve your anger. Not because the person who caused it has been absolved. Not because the loss wasn't real. But because you have one life, and you have finally done the math, and the numbers do not support spending it in a cage built from something that already happened. What nobody tells you about genuine release is what comes after it. The story always ends at the letting go, as though that is a destination, as though dropping the coal is the whole point. But the point, the extraordinary, disorienting, quietly revolutionary point, is what your hand can do once it is no longer holding the burning thing. The energy that was trapped in resistance becomes available. The mental space that was occupied by the unresolvable argument clears. People who have genuinely released what they were carrying do not become passive. They do not become defeated or indifferent or emptied out. They become, often with a velocity that surprises them, extraordinarily effective, because all the force they were directing at the movable is suddenly available for the movable for the actual choices that are actually theirs, for the actual life that is actually happening. A woman named Carmen spent 6 years trying to fix a friendship that had been breaking for most of those 6 years. She strategized around it, accommodated it, reduced herself to fit inside it, reached out and pulled back and reached out again, had the same conversation in slightly different configurations until the words lost their meaning entirely. She was so busy trying to save the relationship that she never stopped long enough to ask whether the relationship, in its current form, was worth saving, whether what she was fighting to preserve was something real or just a memory of what had once been real and the hope that enough effort might resurrect it. When she finally stopped, not in defeat but in clarity, the kind that arrives when you have exhausted every alternative, she expected to feel loss. She felt it for a while, and then she felt something she had not expected and could not immediately name. It took her several weeks to find the word for it. The word was room. There was suddenly room in her schedule, in her emotional life, in her sense of herself, that had been occupied for 6 years by something that was consuming without replenishing, taking without returning. The space that opened was not empty. It was available. You already know what you are holding that you should have put down. You have known for some time. The mind that is still debating whether it deserves to be dropped is not uncertain about the answer. It is afraid of what the answer will require. It will require you to stop being the person who is wronged and start being the person who is free. And those two identities are not always easy to separate, especially when the wrongness was real. But the burning coal does not care about being right. It only knows how to burn. And you only get one hand, one life, one present moment in which something real and worth having is actually available. Drop it, not for them, for the hand. Chapter 4. The Zero Apology Life. How to stop over-explaining, over-justifying, and shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. There's a person, and you may recognize them because you may be them, at least partially, at least on certain days, who apologizes for existing. Not in those words, not consciously, not in a way they could point to if you asked them directly, but in the accumulation of small daily gestures that add up over years to a posture of perpetual apology for the simple fact of taking up space in the world. They say sorry when someone walks into them. They preface every request with a paragraph of qualifications designed to make the request seem smaller than it is, less inconvenient, more deserving of being granted. They say things like, "I'm not sure this makes sense," before saying something that makes complete sense. And "this is probably a stupid question," before asking something entirely reasonable. And "I don't want to be a bother," before asking for something they are completely entitled to ask for. They decline the extra helping before anyone offers it because they have already, at some unconscious level, decided they do not deserve to want more than the standard portion. They make themselves smaller in meetings, at dinner tables, in relationships, in their own homes, compressing their actual size into whatever shape seems least likely to inconvenience or disturb or provoke anyone in the vicinity. This is not humility. Humility is something genuine and grounded, a quality that comes from knowing your worth so clearly that you have nothing to prove and no need to perform superiority. What this is, this relentless apologizing, this chronic self-compression, this constant management of everyone else's comfort at the expense of your own, is fear. It is the same fear that is run through every chapter of this book wearing different clothes. And in this particular outfit, it is perhaps the most socially acceptable and therefore the most insidious version of the whole wardrobe. Because the person who over-apologizes is not criticized for it. They are often called nice. They are called easy to get along with, low-maintenance considerate. They receive social rewards for their self-erasure, which makes the self-erasure extremely difficult to identify as the problem it is, and nearly impossible to stop without feeling like they're becoming something monstrous. The roots of this behavior go deep and they go early. Most chronic over-apologizers learn at a formative age, not from a lecture, not from a rule explicitly stated, but from the texture of daily experience, that their needs, their wants, their emotional reality, their simple physical presence in a room were things that required justification. They grew up in households where expressing a need directly was somehow dangerous, where conflict was a thing to be preemptively diffused at all costs, where the emotional temperature of the adults in a room was a condition that children were responsible for managing, or they grew up sensitive in environments that had no tolerance for sensitivity and learned to preemptively apologize for their reactions before anyone could criticize them for having the reactions in the first place. Or they were told, in the countless subtle ways that children are told things without words, that love and belonging were contingent on being easy, on not asking for too much, not feeling too loudly, not needing things that complicated other people's lives. The child who learns this lesson learns it completely and carries it into every room they enter for the rest of their life. They become extraordinarily skilled at reading what other people need and reshaping themselves to provide it. They become fluent in the emotional languages of everyone around them while losing access to their own. They develop what looks from the outside like exceptional social sensitivity and what feels from the inside like a constant low-grade anxiety about whether they are, at this precise moment, being enough of the right thing for whoever is currently in front of them. And they apologize, constantly, reflexively, preemptively, not because they have done something wrong, but because the apology is a small offering, a gesture of non-threat, a way of saying please don't be upset with me before anyone has indicated they might be. Here is what this costs, in the most concrete and daily terms available. Every unnecessary apology you offer for your existence trains the people around you to expect it. It establishes, in the unspoken grammar of every relationship you're in, that your presence requires justification and their comfort requires maintenance. It does not make people like you more, not the people worth keeping, not the ones whose regard is actually worth having. It makes them like you less, because self-erasure is not attractive, it is not admirable, it does not read as kindness. It reads, to the animal part of every human nervous system that is paying attention to these things, as low status, as uncertainty, as an invitation push further because you have already demonstrated that you will accommodate the push. The people who truly respect you are the people who see you hold your ground. State your needs directly. Decline what doesn't work for you without performing elaborate theater around the declining. The ones who only like you because you made yourself small will leave when you stop, and their leaving is not a loss. It is a clarification. There is a man named Richard who spent the first 42 years of his life writing emails that were longer than they needed to be by approximately 3 paragraphs. The extra paragraphs were never about the content of the email. They were about managing the possible emotional reaction of the recipient, softening the request, qualifying position, acknowledging every conceivable way in which the email might be inconvenient or unwelcome, building such an elaborate cushion of preemptive apology around the actual point that by the time the reader arrived at the point they had already been primed to see it as something requiring apology. Richard did this in emails. He did it in conversations. He did it in negotiations where he would preemptively discount his own position before the other party had even had the chance to push back, essentially doing their job for them out of a terror of the conflict that might arrive if he didn't. He was very widely regarded as a pleasant man to work with, which was true, and it cost him, conservatively, around $40,000 in undersold contracts by the time someone who loved him enough to be honest did the math with him out loud. What changed for Richard was not a revelation, but a practice. His therapist gave him a single instruction that was so simple it seemed trivial and proved, in application, to be one of the hardest things he had ever done. The instruction was, send the email when it is finished, not when it is cushioned, not when it is apologized around. When it contains what it needs to contain and nothing else, send it. No pre-apology, no qualifying, no performing smallness to make the recipient comfortable with the ask. Just the ask, professionally stated, period at the end of the sentence. Send. The first time he did, his hand trembled slightly over the trackpad. He was waiting for the ceiling to fall in. It did not. The recipient responded with a simple yes and a timeline, and that was the end of it. And Richard sat at his desk for a moment, understanding that he had spent decades writing insurance policies for disasters that were never going to happen. The unexplained no is perhaps the purest expression of everything this chapter is about, and it is the one that people find most terrifying practice. We have been so thoroughly trained in the etiquette of justification. The idea that a no without a reason is rude, that declining requires explanation, that the person asking deserves to understand why, that the simple, complete, unjustified no feels almost violent when we first attempt it. I can't make it. That doesn't work for me. No thank you. Sentences that end where they end, that do not trail off into elaborate performance of regret and alternative suggestion, and detailed accounting of why your schedule looks the way it does this particular week. The no that stands on its own without a committee of explanations propping it up from either side. The truth is that most people, when they receive a simple and direct no, accept it immediately and move on to their next option. The elaborate explanation you constructed to soften it was not for them. It was for you. For the part of you that is terrified of their disappointment, terrified that without the explanation it will think badly of you, terrified that the unadorned no will reveal you as someone who puts their own needs above others' convenience, which is, of course, sometimes a precise truth, and also perfectly reasonable, and also something you are apparently still not entirely at peace with, or you would not be spending 20 minutes crafting a 2-sentence email. There is a woman named Priya, who for most of her adult life attended events she did not want to attend, maintained friendships that exhausted her, sat on committees that bored her absolutely witless, and said yes to things at a rate that left her so depleted by Friday afternoon that she spent the weekend recovering instead of living. She was very popular. She was also running on empty in a way that had become so normal she had stopped recognizing it as empty and simply called it being an adult. The first time she declined a social invitation without an excuse, without the invented prior engagement, without the elaborate family obligation, without the apologetic and detailed account of her schedule, she felt guilty for 3 days. The second time it was 2 days. By the 6th or 7th time, she had discovered something that changed the entire texture of her week, which was that most of the people she had been performing the excuses for had barely registered the decline at all. They had moved on, made other plans, filled the seat with someone else. The audience of performance had, as audiences tend to, been largely imaginary. This is the zero apology life in practice. It is not a life without consideration for others. That would be a different and much less interesting book. It is a life in which consideration for others is real and chosen rather than compulsive and fearful. The difference between helping because you genuinely want to and helping because you're terrified of what will happen to a relationship if you don't is not a subtle distinction. It lives in the body as a completely different physical experience, and it produces completely different results in the quality of the help, in the quality of the relationship, and in the quality of what remains of you at the end of the day, when you stop managing everyone else's reaction to your existence and start spending that energy on the existence itself. Something happens that is difficult to describe without sounding like the kind of language this book has been deliberately avoiding, but it is real, and the people who have found their way to it will recognize the description immediately. There is a kind of ease that becomes available, not the ease of having no problems, not the ease of everything going smoothly, but the ease of moving through your own life as yourself, taking up the space you actually take up, wanting what you actually want, saying what you actually mean, and discovering that the world does not, in fact, collapse when you stop holding it up with your apologies. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of you, not your employer, not your family, not your oldest friend, not the stranger on the street whose comfort you have been pre-managing since before they arrived. You are allowed to be the full size of yourself in every room you enter. You are allowed to want things without dressing the wanting in 17 layers of qualification. You are allowed to say no, simply and completely, and have that be enough. You are allowed to send an email when it says what it needs to say. You are allowed to decline the invitation, hold the boundary, state the need, and exist in the world without running a continuous commentary designed to make everyone comfortable with the fact that you are here. You are here. That requires no apology. It never did. The only question now is how much longer you plan to keep offering one. Chapter 5. The Unbothered Life. What happens to your world when you master the art of not giving a damn? Let me show you someone, not a fictional composite, not an idealized myth, not the kind of aspirational portrait that belongs on a motivational poster in a corporate break room. A real person, or close enough to real that you will recognize them because you have met versions of them, and something about being in their presence always did something to the air in the room. They wake up in the morning and there is a moment, just a moment, brief and ordinary, before the day begins, and in that moment they do not immediately reach for their phone. They do not run the mental inventory of everything that could go wrong today, everything that went wrong yesterday, everything that might need managing or defending or explaining before noon. They simply wake up. They exist for a moment in the uncomplicated fact of being alive on another morning. And then they get up and they begin. They move through their day making decisions, not performing decisions for an invisible audience, not outsourcing decisions to whoever seems to have the strongest opinion about what they should do. Actual decisions made from the inside, from the place where their values live rather than the place where their fears live. When something goes wrong, and things go wrong, this is not a portrait of a charmed life. This is a portrait of an ordinary life met with extraordinary groundedness. They feel it. They do not perform stoicism. They do not pretend the disappointment isn't real, or that the frustration isn't there, or that the grief, when it comes, is somehow beneath them. They feel it fully, with the kind of presence that most people are too defended to allow themselves. And then they ask the question that separates them from almost everyone else in the room. What, in this situation, is actually mine to do? Not what should I be feeling. Not what would make this look better to people watching. Not how do I prevent this from ever happening again in a way that gives me the illusion of control over things I never controlled. Just what is mine, what is here, what can be done with what is actually available. This person loves. This is important to say clearly and with force, because somewhere between the introduction of this book and this final chapter, some part of you may have constructed a version of psychological freedom that looks like detachment. Like the goal is to care about less, feel less, need less, want less, until you have distilled yourself down some impervious philosophical minimum that nothing can touch and nothing can move. That is not what this is. That is just a different kind of prison with better lighting. The person in this chapter is describing loves of fullness that is only possible because they have stopped wasting their love on things that were never worth it. They are present in their relationships in a way that people who are constantly managing perception can never quite be, because presence requires that you actually be somewhere, and it is very difficult to be somewhere when you're simultaneously monitoring how you appear to be there. They care passionately about the things that matter, their work, their people, their values, the world outside their window, with intensity that has been made possible, paradoxically, by their willingness to release everything that was pretending to matter while draining the life from what actually did. The crucial distinction that the unbothered life is built on is not between caring and not caring. It is between caring and being enslaved, between loving something and making it the condition of your stability, between wanting a thing and needing that thing to happen in a specific way on a specific timeline, where the whole architecture of your inner life comes down. The unbothered person has drawn this line and keeps drawing it, not because they drew it once and it stayed, but because it requires maintenance, daily and sometimes hourly, the way a garden requires it. Not dramatic intervention, but consistent, quiet attention to what is being allowed to grow. So what does this actually look like in the architecture of a day? Because philosophy without practice is just aesthetics, and the purpose of every idea in this book has always been the same thing: a different quality of ordinary Tuesday. It looks like a morning that begins without the immediate performance of productivity, without the guilty calculation of how much you got done yesterday and how much you need to get done today to justify your existence to a standard that was never yours to begin with. It looks like the ability to sit with your coffee for 7 minutes without it meaning anything except that you are sitting with your coffee for 7 minutes, and that is a complete and sufficient thing. Small, yes, irreducibly small, and the foundation of everything. It looks like a relationship with discomfort that is different from the one most people have. Most people treat discomfort the way they treat a fire alarm, as something requiring immediate response, immediate suppression, immediate resolution, and so they make decisions from discomfort rather than through it, reaching for whatever will make the feeling stop, rather than waiting long enough to understand what the feeling is trying to say. The person who has done the work of this book has learned that discomfort is not an emergency. It is information sometimes and weather other times, and occasionally just a natural friction of being alive in a world that was not designed around your preferences. The ability to be uncomfortable without treating it as a catastrophe is one of the most quietly radical freedoms available to a human being, and almost no one talks about it because it does not make for a good product to sell. It looks like a different relationship to other people's opinions, not indifference. The person who is genuinely unbothered does not need to perform not caring, does not need to announce their freedom from what others think, does not feel the need to explain that they do not seek approval, because the need to announce it is itself a form of seeking it. It looks from the outside like simple self-possession, like someone who listens to feedback without collapsing under it and without defensively dismissing it, who can hold the possibility that they are wrong without it threatening the foundation of who they are, who can be criticized without turning the criticism into a referendum on their worth as a human being. It looks, in other words, like stability, not the performed stability of someone who has learned to hide their reactions, but the actual stability of someone who knows who they are clearly enough that other people's narratives about them are interesting at most and irrelevant the rest of the time. There are practices that build this, actual, concrete, daily practices, not the kind that require a retreat or a guru or 3 hours of morning routine that no one who works a real job and has real children could sustain past the first Tuesday. The first and most foundational is the simple, repeated, unglamorous practice of noticing. Noticing when you have drifted back into the worry machine, when you are replaying, rehearsing, catastrophizing, running the disaster scenario again, and naming it without judgment. Not, I am anxious, something must be wrong. Just, the alarm is going off again. This is the observer developing, the sky separating from the weather, and it does not require meditation, although meditation helps, and it does not require therapy, although therapy helps, and it does not require anything except a consistent willingness to pause between the thought and the reaction long enough to ask whether the reaction is yours or the machine's. The second practice is the one this book has been building toward since the first page, and it is embarrassingly simple to describe and genuinely difficult to inhabit. The practice of asking, in any moment of anxiety or reactivity or compulsive overcaring, what is actually in your control right now? Not as a rhetorical deflection, not as a way of bypassing genuine feeling, but as a real and earnest question put to the moment. This situation is real. My feelings about it are real. What, in this actual present moment, can I actually do? The honest answer to that question almost always clarifies. It makes the available actions visible by removing the fog of the unavailable ones. It returns the person to their own power, which is always smaller than the power we wish we had, and always larger than the power we act like we have when we are in the grip of helpless anxiety. The third practice is the ongoing, imperfect, never quite finished work of knowing what you actually value, not what you're told to value, not what would be socially respectable to value, not what the imaginary jury of your internalized critics expects to see on your list, but what, when you are quiet enough to hear it, actually matters to you, because the art of not giving a damn is never about caring about nothing. It is about knowing so clearly what deserves your care that the things that don't deserve it stop being able to steal it. Values are the filter through which the unbothered life runs. They are how you know which criticism to take seriously and which to release, which relationships to invest in and which to stop performing in, which risks are worth the discomfort of taking, and which fears are not pointing at anything real. Without knowing your values with some clarity, not giving a damn collapses into nihilism. With them, it becomes something else entirely, a life that is coherent from the inside rather than performed for the outside. Now here's the part that most books about psychological freedom either skip or handle with a dishonesty that this book is not willing to offer you. The old patterns come back. They always come back. There will be a morning, perhaps soon after you put this book down, perhaps a month from now, when you are genuinely starting to feel different. When you wake up and anxiety is back, heavy and specific, and absolutely convinced of its own authority. When someone's opinion matters too much again, and you cannot immediately remember why it ever stopped. When you find yourself drafting the over-explained email, or rehearsing the argument that will never happen, or lying awake at 3 a.m. carrying the weight of imaginary futures with the same exhausting thoroughness you always did. And in that moment, you will have a choice that is only available to you because of the distance you have traveled. The choice to treat the return of the old pattern as evidence that none of it worked, that you are back to zero, that the whole project was wishful thinking, or to treat it as weather, as the alarm going off in an empty room, as your mind doing what minds do when left unsupervised, which is generate threats, and your job not being to silence the alarm but to check the room, find it empty, and return to yourself with a little less drama than last time. Every single time you choose the second option, it becomes marginally easier. Not perfectly easy, not permanently easy, but easier by some small and real increment than it was the last time. This is not a linear process, and it is not a destination. It is a practice in the truest sense of the word, the kind that requires showing up again and again to the same essential work, and finding something slightly more available each time. The gap between the anxious thought and the moment you recognize it for what it is gets shorter. The grip of someone else's opinion on your nervous system loosens its duration, if not always its initial intensity. The coal gets dropped a little faster. The apology stays in your throat a little more often, not because you have become someone different, but because you have become more thoroughly and consistently yourself, which is, in the end, the only project this or any book about psychological freedom has ever actually been about. Now let me show you something. Not a portrait of the unbothered person from the outside this time, but from the inside, and not in some hypothetical future, but in a timeline that is genuinely, concretely available to you from where you're standing right now. 6 months from today, if you take what this book is offering and apply it with the imperfect, inconsistent, entirely sufficient effort that real human beings are capable of sustaining, not the Instagram version, not the version where you meditate for an hour every morning and journal for 45 minutes every evening, and have completely redesigned your relationship to anxiety in a clean and photogenic arc. Just a version where you try, fail, notice, return, try again. The texture of your daily experience will be measurably different. The worry will still exist. The difficult people will still be difficult. The uncertainty that is simply the permanent condition of being alive will have not resolved itself into the clarity you have always wanted, but you will be carrying less. The things that used to hijack your entire afternoon will be taking an hour. The things that used to take an hour will be taking 10 minutes. The opinions that used to live rent-free in your head for weeks will be staying for a day, then half a day, then the length of time it takes to notice them, and remember that you are the sky and they are weather. 1 year from today, the relationships in your life will have rearranged themselves quietly but unmistakably around the new terms you have set, not by announcement, not by confrontation, but by the steady gravitational reality of a person who has stopped being available for dynamics that require their smallness. Some relationships will have deepened into something more honest than they have ever been, because you're finally showing up in them as yourself rather than as the version of yourself that was calibrated for palatability. Some will have quietly fallen away, having depended on a compliance you are no longer offering, and their absence will feel less like loss than like a room that has finally been cleared of furniture that never fit. New ones will have arrived. They always do. When you stop filling the available space with things that don't belong there, carrying a quality of recognition that is only possible between people who are both, in their different ways, living from the inside out. 5 years from today, the life that is available to you, the one that has always been available to you, the one that was waiting behind everything you were spending your energy on that was never worth it, will be the one you are actually living. Not a perfect life, not a life without difficulty or loss or the ordinary heartbreaks. They're simply the cost of loving anything in a world where everything changes. But a life that is genuinely yours. A life that moves in the direction of what you actually value, rather than away from what you actually fear. A life in which the most creative and vital parts of you are no longer being consumed by the management of imaginary disasters and imaginary audiences and the enormous, exhausting, completely unnecessary labor of apologizing for the fact that you exist. That life is not waiting for you to be ready. It is not waiting for the anxiety to disappear or the difficult people to become easier or the uncertainty to resolve into the safety you have been waiting for. It is available right now in the actual conditions that are actually present in the life that is already here, the moment you decide, as many times as it takes, to stop giving it away. You are standing at a threshold, not the dramatic cinematic kind. Not the kind that announces itself with swelling music and a clear sense of before and after. Just a quiet, ordinary, enormously significant kind that exists in the space between finishing something and deciding what it means. The moment after a book closes and before the next thing begins, when something is shifted enough to be felt but not yet enough to be named. You are not the same person who opened this book. You may not feel dramatically different. And that is fine, because dramatic difference is the language of performance, and what has happened here is quieter and more real than that. Something has been seen that cannot be unseen. The worry machine has been named. The opinion trap has been identified. The burning coal has been examined in the light. The apology that was never yours to give has been, at least once, returned to sender. And the unbothered life, not the fantasy of it, but the actual available architecture of it, has been made visible in a way that makes it impossible to entirely pretend you don't know where the door is. What happens next is not decided by this book. It is decided in 1,000 small moments that belong entirely to you. The moment you notice the alarm going off and check the room before obeying it. The moment you send an email without the 3 paragraphs of pre-apology. The moment someone's opinion rises up to hijack your afternoon and you feel it arrive, and then, slowly and imperfectly, feel it leave without having taken anything essential with it. Each of those moments is the practice. Each of them is a choice, made again, to live like someone who understands what deserves them and what is not. Most of what you are afraid of will never happen. Most of what you are worried about does not deserve the extraordinary resource of your attention. The life you are waiting to live once everything feels safe is available right now, in the actual imperfect present, exactly as it is. The most rebellious thing you can do in a world that profits from your anxiety, your insecurity, and your endless hunger for approval is to simply refuse. Refuse to suffer for things that were never worth the suffering. Refuse to carry what was never yours to carry. Refuse to make yourself smaller than you are for rooms that were never worth shrinking for. You have been given permission. You always had it. Now go and be unbothered, not as a performance, not as a philosophy, but as a simple, radical, daily practice of finally, at long last, letting only what truly matters in.